Good evening and welcome to Italian Impact Weekly. I am your host, Steve Stefano Mancini. And again, I always want to thank my listeners my dozens and dozens of listeners from all over the world. And in fact, I had kind of a fun boost in November. For whatever reason, I have a uptick of a lot of people tuning in from Singapore. So I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to my listeners in Singapore. So thank you all very much. I've also got a lot of listeners that have been tuning in from Brazil. And believe it or not, folks, I've got someone in Russia that loves me. So besides all the Americans and the Europeans, I want to appreciate the fact that I really do have listeners all over the world that are starting to tune in. And I am telling you, I am humbled by this because the fact that you are listening to me somewhere in the world, I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. And in fact, what I do now is I really pay attention to the guests. Not that I didn't before, but I try and bring back what I call the fan favorites. And in fact, I've got some really good guests lined up. And today I brought back, I'm going to say a young one from the past because Karen has many, many years left on her because she is a busy person who loves traveling. And I've had her on the show before. And I will tell you, when I reached out to Karen and she said yes, I was actually very happy. And we're going to talk about her latest book because I read her previous book. She was on the guest before. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Karen Hay. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me again.
No, I love it. I love it. In fact, I read your last book, and you know the funniest thing was when I got the book and I said, hey, let me, I want to get a couple copies, and you put all these bookmarks in it. And I am telling you, I have used every single one of those bookmarks from the Calabria one. So I'm going to have to get some new ones from the new book.
Oh, yeah. You were supposed to give those bookmarks to all your friends.
Yeah, that didn't happen. Well, no, actually, I gave some away. No, in all honesty, I gave some away. But I probably had about 8 left. And I ended up using them. And so I've got all these books all over. So I'm a professor here at Robert Morris. And I've got these books all over. And I've got all these bookmarks from Calabria in there. And I love it. It's a beautiful shot. And it really does sum up Calabria. And, real quick before we jump into the books, and I'm going to go to both books. I know we talked about the Calabrian, but I'm going to talk about Basilicata here in a minute. But I want to give everyone just kind of a quick background on you because you have a passion now for a specific region in Italy. And so kind of like tell the folks, who are you and where did your passion come, especially what it seems like to me for Southern Italy?
Yes. Well, interestingly, it happened by chance. So it wasn't, I wasn't born into it, as I know you have your Italian roots, but my parents did live in Italy in 1950. And they passed that love on to me. Later on in life, I studied languages, in particular Italian, and I ended up in Calabria just by chance, teaching English. I was there for 4 years, and my book, Calabria, the Other Italy, sort of grew out of that. And then after I did my book, I started a blog, and that now has, I believe, 167 posts, and they're quite detailed. There are thousands of photos, mostly about Calabria, also about Basilicata, which is my second book, Basilicata, Authentic Italy, and about other places in Italy. And then I started tours. And so it has become all-consuming, and as you say, it is my mission. So here I am talking about, once again, Southern Italy.
No, and that's wonderful. And I'll tell you why. I spoke to you the first time I was on doing a different show a couple years back when I first was introduced to you in your book. And then by coincidence, since then, I had discovered that I had relatives. And so I have finally made it down to Calabria on 2 separate occasions. And I absolutely do think it is a missed area by most tourists. And we talked about this the last time. I think the challenge for a lot of, especially non-Italian speakers, I think they're intimidated because there's no easy way to get to a lot of the parts of Calabria. Now that you've been kind of promoting the southern part of Italy, are you starting to see any kind of change in the dynamics of tourism?
Well, I do think that there are certain locations in Calabria and also Basilicata, since they're the two regions I really focus on, that have certain towns and cities that the greater, as you say, tourism world is focused on. For example, Calabria has Tropea. And so you'll see that picture, the image of, you look out to the ocean and you see this little church on an island, and it will be viral, Facebook and on these Italian pages. And you'll see more articles. Also, Reggio Calabria is starting to get more tourist interest, also amongst Europeans, because now Ryanair is going there. But, and Basilicata, of course, same thing. Everyone knows Matera, but they never heard of the region where Matera is. So lots of people go to Matera, they think it's in Puglia, but it's actually in the small region called Basilicata that's in the step of the Italian boot. So there has been more interest, I would say. Yeah. Maybe not so much to go to the smaller place, but there's that kind of, as you mentioned, tourist interest, not the traveler interest, which is, that is really what I focus on. People who really want to really know what's there and get into the culture more than just to sit for the selfie with a drink in their hand in a background. So I think that I know I focus on travelers, people who are interested in the history, in the art, in the various landscapes. And so I'm not sure that has actually come up that much, but it's definitely come up on the tourist aspect.
Well, it's funny you say that because Calabria is a very weird region in the sense that, in the southern portions, all around it, you have these beautiful beaches. And I think a lot of people don't know that. So you have beautiful beaches with a lot of touristy spots for the Italians and Europeans. I know where I go, there's almost no English speakers down there. And it's not because the people around there don't speak English. It's because it's not on the, hey, you should go to this area. But at the same time, then you throw in the Central Calabria, and I don't think a lot of people know, you can ski in Central Calabria. So you have, 15 minutes from the beach. In the wintertime, you can go skiing. And then if you like outdoors and hiking, again, it's mountainous, it's trees. I told you the first time I went through there, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be desert. It's green, it's beautiful. So I think a lot of people don't even know what's there. And then to get to those kind of what I'll call no-name beach, it's like most travel agencies aren't even going to know that outside of, Italy, yet alone outside of Europe, inside the United States, because where do they take you? Rome, Milan, Venice, Florence. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I just think it's kind of like, what's your intent to go there,
Right. Well, you're missing out if you're just going to the one famous place. But that's just sort of like checking things off on a list,
right?
As opposed to really wanting to explore. And as you say, there's 500 miles of beautiful coastline, and there are mountains down the whole center of the region. There's a lot of agriculture, incredible agricultural, as you know, the products, from the meats and cheeses to all of the fruits and vegetables, the citrus. There's a peperoncino famous for. There's the bergamot down in the province of Reggio Calabria. So there's so much there.
Well, and again, a lot of people, it's funny because a lot of the people, especially in the Pittsburgh area, they either come from Abruzzo or Calabria, and they talk about the different diets, the different it's like everywhere in Italy, depending on what region you're in. You have very different tastes. Obviously, being in the South, you get more of the spicy pepper, all of the, you can grow your olives, your figs year round, lemons. I mean, and that was the other thing. I never realized, for example, how many lemon, variants are down in there, how many different fruit trees. So it's not a wasteland. And people look at it and they say, oh, it's poor. Well, yeah, it's poor because it's got no major industrial cities. But at the same time, don't confuse poor with inactive, if that makes sense.
Right, right. There's a lot of agriculture, and people don't realize that. For example, you mentioned olive. That 2/3 of olive oil comes from southern Italy, and Calabria is one of the big locations. So Puglia, Calabria,
Right.
Sicily, and Basilicata, also, all regions, but there's a lot of agricultural.
And I was going to say, I want to transition because Basilicata is, you wrote a book on this, and obviously a lot of areas you could have written a book about. You've been all over that area. Let's start with the why for that book before we jump into the book.
Yes, well, I had lived in Calabria and wrote the book about it, and I realized, well, even beforehand, that there wasn't that much written in English about the region, and there wasn't much on the internet at the time. Of course, now, I guess 10 years later, things have really changed in that regard. But I saw the same thing with Basilicata, and I also found that many people in Italy as well didn't know much about Basilicata. And so I thought, well, it's a small region. It shouldn't take that long. And then I started exploring, and it's another mountainous region, although there are 2 water access points. There is water on the Mediterranean Sea, very dramatic side of the coast, on the western coast, which is a continuation of the Amalfi Coast. So you can imagine what that looks like, very spectacular. And then there are the flat, sandy beaches on the southern side of Basilicata. But then there are mountains all in the center. And so I think sometimes when there are mountains, even though an area might not be that big with square miles, when you're going up and down on the hills, it really seems a lot bigger to go from one village to the next. It might only be 10 miles away, but it could take you an hour.
Oh, it's funny you say that because that is definitely one thing that wasn't lost on me. And I'll give you a good example. In September, I went to Abruzzo. Now, I know not the same area, but similar kind of philosophy. We would go from one town to the next town, and it was not, you look at a map and you go, oh, it's fairly close, but you are winding up, down, around, and you're like, this is not physically far on a map, but just the sheer, it's just a windy up and down road that I was actually getting car sick driving there because I was in the back in a stick, and you're going up and down and around. I'm thinking, oh man, just get me there. But that is something that I think a lot of people don't really appreciate about Italy is, whether you're in the south, central, or north, that mountainous region that runs the entire boot almost. One, it's beautiful, but two, it's not like the Appalachians, which are kind of more smooth rounded. It is definitely more what I would say, relative age-wise, a newer, because there's a lot of volcanic activity and earthquakes in Italy, so things are still changing over there. It's not like where there's no geographic movement over there. So a lot of those mountains are still very high, very sharp, very, very cavernous, and it makes for wonderful commutes. Let's just say that.
Right, right. And speaking of volcanoes, an interesting fact about Basilicata, it actually has only volcano that is east of the Apennines. So it's an expensive volcano, so it's not going to erupt. But it's an interesting fact. It's a beautiful area. There are lakes in the sunken center of the volcano, and the wine from the area, from the name of the volcano is the Vulture, and it's just wonderful wine from the soil around the Vulture. So the Aglianico del Vulture wine is famous, and justly so. Things that you never think about.
Right. Folks, we're going to be right back because, as always, I have to pay the bills, so be right back after these messages. Thanks to Greater Pittsburgh Travel. For any of your travel needs, let Tom and the team at Greater Pittsburgh Travel know, and they'll take care of you. For more information, call 412-331-2244 or visit their website at www.greaterpittsburghtravel.com. For all of your plumbing needs, be sure to try Palucci Plumbing. Nick and the team have decades of experience and will get you back up and running. For more information, call Palucci Plumbing at 412-782-5050. And we want to thank the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. If you're interested in learning more, you can find their contact information on Facebook at Calabria Club of Pittsburgh. Again, thanks Domenica and the team at the Calabria Club of Pittsburgh for your support. And we want to thank La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei, the only nonprofit school in Pittsburgh endorsed by the Italian Consulate. If you're interested in learning Italian or have your children being immersed in the Italian culture and language, be sure to give them a call at 412-404-7070. And that's La Scuola d'Italia Galileo Galilei. We'd also like to thank Chris Gonzalez from the Knights of Columbus. If you have any questions about joining the Knights of Columbus, reach out to Chris Gonzalez at 412-605-9074. All right, welcome back. And again, I want to thank you for tuning in. And I am joined by the wonderful, award-winning author, Karen Haid. Now, we have just kind of entered the realm of Basilicata, which is another region that I'll call it a not so well-known region. And Karen, you were talking about the wine, and that was the one thing I did notice. I remember when I was down in, I was right outside of Pompeii, and I just remember having the wine that was grown up on, was at Vesuvio, and I distinctly remember that it, look, I'm not saying it's because it was Italian wine, but I'm saying that region made very good wine because there is, it's almost a proven fact that crops, whatever it is, grown in that volcanic ash because of the nutrients, always tastes a little better, and that does translate to the wine. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Well, and I believe the experts tell us that the volcanic soil is good for wine. Definitely the wine in the region of Basilicata, as well as Calabria, has excellent wines.
I was going to say, you're out on the West Coast. Now, I know the Napa Valley's out there, and, the wine out there is obviously pretty good. But do you guys maybe should think about, a volcano on the West Coast, or no, you're good enough as is? That was a joke, Karen. No, but let's talk about the book now. So, little well-known region. You've obviously done this before, so you kind of have a good approach to writing. What was the impetus then for this book that got you started, and then tell the listeners about the book?
Well, as I said, I was thinking about doing another book, and when I mentioned it to some friends, some Italian friends, I had one who said something like, "Really? That's sort of a region that you just kind of pass through to get to another place." And this was the Calabrian. And I said, "Are you listening to yourself? Every place deserves a look." And if somebody said the same thing about Calabria, which they do often, they just want to go from Rome to Sicily, and they drive through, and people will write to me every once in a while, and they'll say, "Can you tell me a good place for lunch as I pass through Calabria?" And I don't even want to respond.
Cosenza. Okay.
Yeah. And so, just look at the map yourself and pick a place.
That's about what it comes down to. Yeah, well.
Yeah. So, but the same thing with Basilicata. A small region. It doesn't have any big cities. The two cities are Potenza and Matera, and they're both the capital of the province of Potenza and Matera. And so it's not a place that people know that much about. And I thought, well, it was a deserving region, had a lot of history. And, of course, it has Matera, which is the very, very famous UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has caves that are dug out of this. It's basically a canyon. There's a canyon. And it's the kind of stones that they were able to dig out these caves and live in and also build on top. And it's a very fascinating place. So there was so much there. And so I decided to write a book about Basilicata, which another reason why it's not that well known is that for a good bit of its history, it was known as Lucania.
I was going to say it didn't ring a bell to me. That's why when you Okay.
Yeah. The people are called Lucani, or Lucania, Lucano, and so it's a little confusing even for Italians.
It's funny. I never heard until I saw your email. I didn't even know to be honest, I didn't even know the region existed.
Right.
I mean,
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know all of the regions, but that one in particular definitely did not ring a bell. But
Well, you
Lucania
rode
definitely
through
did.
the bus on it.
Yep, and probably didn't even know it.
You didn't know it.
And that's the shame of it, because these areas are, I don't think people appreciate, number one, these places weren't built yesterday. They have tremendous history, and especially in what I'll call these older areas. In some ways, the traditions and the history is better preserved than the places that are constantly being hit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. For example, in Calabria, in the early 1900s, when one of the famous archaeologists from northern Italy went down, he found Locri because they didn't build on top of it. And so he was able to just excavate in farmland. And so it was amazing what they found in a place like that. Or it's more difficult in a place like Rome, where of course, if you dig underground, it must be incredible what's underneath. But you can't really upset an entire city.
Right. That's right.
But Basilicata, for example, has 9 national archaeological museums.
Now,
so for a region that only has 500,000 people, that's a lot.
Well, I was going to say, are these Roman, Greek, Etruscan, or a little of all the above?
Well, the Etruscans were in the north.
Yeah, I don't know if they were that far south.
Yeah, no, they not so far south. But no, of course there are Romans before there are Greeks, and also of other native. And there's also another group called the Lucani.
Okay.
So there are various native groups.
No, I was going to say, because I know that is the one thing, again, if the folks that are listening to this are very, if you're very curious on Italian history, and I hope you are, and the culture, it is not as monogamous or as a lot of people would think. I mean, there are a lot of cultures that built on top of each other or that were assimilated. Rome, number one, wasn't built in a day, and two, Rome was ultimately the consolidation of, city-states. So these other cultures that were around there or had been settled by, whether it was the Greeks or whoever else came through there. So, and again, I do like the fact that when you go to these provinces, I know, in fact, I think we talked about this the last time. I think there's still places in Calabria where they're still speaking Greek dialects, or you're still Greek on there. So in Basilicata, is there anything like that has been preserved, whether it's a language, a writing, or something that's there that, like, wow, you won't see this anywhere?
Well, of course, just like anywhere in Italy, villages have their own specific dialect. But, for example, if you look at the dialect in Matera written down, you won't recognize it. You will not be able to figure anything out. And so it is completely different. But there are also towns, for example, in the Polino Mountains, a couple towns that still speak an ancient Albanian language.
Uh-oh.
And there were other towns that were founded by Albanians that now just speak Italian. And there might be, the name of the town might be historically Albanian, or they might say, oh, look, in this wine cave, that's a particular way Albanians carved out a cave. So there are definitely things that remain from different groups, but only a handful of towns will actually be speaking that foreign language.
I'm curious about something, because, in your travels down there, and I can't remember if we talked about this the last time, but one thing I'm very passionate. I love languages. And I really love it whenever you find out that, wow, this small town speaks this dialect from 500 years ago. Do you know if are there efforts made to preserve these things, or is it, in some cases, like, they die out?
Yes, absolutely. There are towns you mentioned the Greek. There are books that they try to get young people, to study and to take up their culture, but it's difficult.
Well, I always say youth is wasted on the young. I think a lot of people don't, especially younger people. Listen, I was no super scholar. Okay, my what I'll call a passion and an appreciation for education came later in life, and it's kind of like, and I think a lot of us that happens to us. Later in life, you go, I coulda, woulda, shoulda, and the things we coulda, woulda, shoulda are things like this. And, I don't know that there's an easy way, to help younger people say, listen, don't not learn this. This is going to be gone one day, and you're not going to be able to ask these questions. Do you have any thoughts about a project like that where maybe you want to kind of say preserve some of these languages, traditions, whatever, for those future generations?
Well, I'm not sure personally about languages because I don't speak any of those languages. I just speak Italian. But I am doing my bit to let people know about the areas, about the history. Matter of fact, on one of my books, it was the Basilicata book, and it was on the, let's see, it was called a library, a library magazine that wrote a review of it, and they put the book into social science category. And I was a little surprised because I didn't think about that. I mean, it's not a travel book.
Right.
It's hard to exactly pinpoint what it is, but they put it into social science because I talk a lot about the history, current things. I'm trying, I guess, to document in a lot of ways what is going on. And because when you open up just a glossy magazine, you're just going to get sort of the same information over and over again.
Right. I do think that the importance of going to these towns and document it, but not, like you said, not documenting it like you're, a travel agent, but documenting it from a like, hey, these people, this is who they are. This is how they live. This is what they do. This is how they speak. This is, I think that's important. So future generations, and unfortunately it might be some of the kids who may have been born in these towns, move away, have families in some of the big cities, and then maybe they want to come back, 30, 40 years later for whatever, to visit, whatever it is, their kids are going to have some kind of documented record of how it was versus, I mean, you and I both have seen this where, these towns, they literally die out in some cases. That's why people talk about the $1 homes. Oh, you can get a dollar home. Listen, nothing's free in this world. Those quote dollar homes you're getting are probably worth $1, and they're in the town that's probably almost a ghost town, and the town and the house probably needs major renovations, and you're probably in the middle of nowhere, and there's nothing to do. There's a reason they want you to move there, because if you don't, the towns are going to die off. And I think people, they don't understand that is a real thing that happens in a lot of these these countries where, look, if there's no industry and the kids say, like, I got to go somewhere else to find a job, then there's nobody there to replenish that older generation, and then that's how these things get lost to time.
Right. And what I try to do also, just in thinking, what you're saying about getting people interested, is when I write, I try my best to make it interesting, to make it light enough. Of course, you're talking about serious material, but to write it in a way that is accessible. And so that's what I try to do. So often, for example, when you are reading about a town on an Italian site, you get fact.
Right.
And people have trouble, grasping on to the detail of every painting in that church. But what is the important element? What makes that town tick? Why would you want to go to that town or specific place or anything? What the food? What makes it so good?
Right.
So that's what I try to do.
No, and again, the fact that you're an award-winning author tells me you're doing a good job. And like I said, I loved Calabria. I'm going to order the new one, so it's called Basilicata. When did that come out?
Basilicata, authentic Italy.
Well, when did that come out?
2020.
Really? How come I don't remember talking about that one. But whatever. Karen.
Well, we had a lot to talk about with the
Calabria. Well, you know what? I think the irony was, I think when you were on the show, I can't remember if I had just gone or was just getting ready to go to Calabria. So I think I had gone once. So I was all hot and fired for going south. Hey, listen, I love the south, southern Italy. I think, you know what, tourists, you don't want to go there? Don't go there. More beach for me, more beautiful scenery for me. Good, the prices are extremely reasonable down there in some beautiful scenic areas. So it's like, if you don't want to go, don't go. But I'm going to tell you, go. So that is what it is. Karen, listen, if folks want to get your book or learn a little more about you, where can they go?
Well, the internet. Everyone does have the internet.
What?
And they're easy to find.
So Karen Haid, all right. Do you have a website or just go out to Amazon?
I have a website that is calabriatheotheritaly.com.
Right.
And I also have a website with my name, KarenHaid.com. It's KarenHai. And on that website, there are all the links to where you can buy the book.
Awesome. And again, that's KarenHaid.com. And I'm also CalabriaTheOtherItaly.com. But don't worry,
and that's
folks.
where my blog is.
Well, that's perfect, because you know what? I'm going to put that down in the description. So, folks, you can go down in the description, click on the links. I'll have both sites out there. I really encourage you to go check out Karen's blog, and I really encourage you to get her books. Especially, I know that a lot of the folks that are listening, especially in my area, they say they're from Calabria and they have those Calabrian roots. These are beautiful, at least I can speak for the Calabrian book, is a beautiful book that really talks about a region that I think a lot of folks are missing. I'm not saying don't go to the big cities. I'm not saying, go to the standard. Hey, I saw the Colosseum, I saw the Vatican, I went to Florence, I saw the Duomo. Like, you got to do that. But I'm saying there's a point in your tours of Italy when you want to get down there that you got to break that mold and go see what I loved when you go, that authentic Italy.
Yes.
So,
and people are always surprised, I have to say. A lot of people who, on my tours, do have Calabrian roots. And even they sometimes hesitate beforehand, thinking, really, 11 or 12 days focused just on this region? Is there enough to fill? And there absolutely is, and they're always very pleased. And then I have other types of guests who have seen everything else. They've been everywhere. And they say, oh, Calabria, Basilicata, I haven't seen those yet.
right.
And they also are delighted with the variety and, I guess, the level of excellence that they didn't expect.
No, I think it's really underappreciated. And I really applaud you for having that passion for a region that a lot of people overlook. And I think they're missing probably what I think is some of the most beautiful scenery in Italy. I mean, I've been to those beaches, I've been to those shores, I've been in those mountains, and I mean, it is beautiful. I mean, that water is crystal clear. The beaches are beaches. You can't complain about the weather. However, when I was there, I think it was last year, when I went, and it was during the big heat wave in Europe. And so I just remember going out to the beach. It was like maybe 10 in the morning, and it was like 90 degrees. And then by about noon, I actually went in because it was too hot. And then everybody came back out around 3 or 4 p.m. to the beach, and it was just beautiful. I mean, I couldn't have asked for better weather at that point, because at 1 p.m. It was just a little too hot, Karen. But that's okay. All right, Karen. Listen, I want to thank you again for being my guest once again. I want to encourage folks to go out there again, check out her blogs, go get a copy of the book. I think you're going to love it. There's a reason she's an award-winning author. And, I also want to encourage you to keep tuning in. I encourage my listeners all over the world to keep sharing this podcast. As you have seen the way I do things, I love to keep it positive. I love to keep it entertaining. I love to inform you, and I love to bring on great guests like Karen. So, Karen, thank you again. And, folks,
thank you very much.
Oh, you're most welcome. And thank you again for tuning in. And, folks, we will see you, or you can see me, next week. Take care. God bless, and have a wonderful week.